You're listening to the Diginauts on the Good Talk Podcast Network.
Hey, it's the Diginauts. This week, have we found signs of life in our solar system?
Will studies on mice lead to longer human lives?
Are the Russians building a Terminator? Oh yeah, and how do you pronounce that planet next to Neptune? All that and more right after this. Society,
The future,
morality,
disruption,
policy,
humanity,
innovation,
technology.
There's the billionaire class, and then there's the rest of you who are also, I guess, allowed to do things.
Exactly.
Diginauts.
What's that?
That was us starting. Hi, everybody. It's the Diginauts. Hello. This is episode 19. It is mid-April. You may or may not be hearing dogs in the background. And what else? What, fire sirens? You were telling me the story of what's going on outside your house.
It's a whole cycle. Sirens go by, which triggers the dogs, which triggers an asshat who blows an air horn trying to silence the dogs.
Okay. Who is the smart guy who's like, I know what'll make these dogs shut up? A really loud noise. That should
And
it.
He must have like an endless supply because like
Of air.
Exactly.
All right. So let's talk some science. Why don't we? We got a good run of things to discuss today, starting with.
Yes, indeed. So artificial intelligence has been an incredibly popular topic lately. And what's even more intriguing is that the very people who work in that industry, who are creating things based on artificial intelligence, they're beginning to not even understand it themselves.
So what does this mean? I saw the headline for this particular concept, and my immediate reaction is like, wait, somebody gets it, right? What does it mean to say that the people making AI don't know what AI is?
Well, the example they started out with, NVIDIA, the chip maker, which is most known for computer chips, has a whole division dedicated to autonomous vehicles.
Okay.
And as part of that, they, in their tests, right, their autonomous car platform and technology, it doesn't follow any instructions from programmers or engineers to drive the car autonomously. Instead, it says that it relies completely on an algorithm that basically taught itself to drive by watching a human drive.
Wow. Okay. So the learning has reached a point where, like, they set up everything, they taught it to walk, or they taught it to learn to walk, and now it has learned to walk, but they're not sure how?
Exactly. So they're basically like that very point that you made is, the crux of why people are a little disturbed, because they're not completely sure how it's making decisions.
Huh.
Right? Like, why is it going straight? Why is it turning right? You know what I mean?
I suppose, but again, they made the algorithm. I guess it reaches a point where it's complex enough, maybe, is the problem. That, because I can understand the idea that, like, coders don't necessarily have to code something in order to make it work, right? Like, we've reached a point in computer programming that people have been doing it now for, depending on how you want to count, 30, 40 years or 50, 60 years, depending on what kinds of computers, if you want to go back to punch cards, right? And we certainly, I work with people all the time who don't know anything about computer programming beyond how to take something somebody else made and kind of stick it together and make it, patch it over, right? But they're not necessarily like the people who could create that thing.
Right.
So that exists.
Yeah. And I think furthermore, it's really diving deep into deep learning, so to speak.
creepy. Not creepy,
Yeah.
but it definitely is like, okay, we made the thing and we're not necessarily controlling the thing anymore. It's designed not to be controlled, so that makes sense, right? But it's, I mean, I guess it's like having a kid, right? Like at some point you teach it to be good, but you can't necessarily count on it to be good. I like to refer to my kids as it, by the way. The it was coming from the artificial intelligence side of the comparison.
Well, so an outcome of all this confusion as to how it works, right? It's like, how do you predict when it might fail?
Yeah. And you just don't.
Right.
Huh. So this would open up a branch of artificial intelligence programming, right? Where the sort of monitoring what's happening, whether you understand it or not, you nonetheless need feedback. You need to be able to measure what's happening in order to be able to add controls on top of whatever you're doing.
And furthermore, what this is leading to is that kind of like a jurisprudence issue, in that is it society's and humans' right to be able to evaluate and or interrogate the AI system?
Yeah, this is yet another episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Like, it's been there, done that. Data is its own living being. You're good to go. It's been determined by Starfleet.
Along those lines, like the European Union is starting in 2018 will require companies to give consumers and users explanations for the decisions that these types of platforms and technologies are making.
I respect that. We've talked about that before, that, if you've got an autonomous car, right, and it's deciding what to do in an accident aversion situation or a prevention situation, it's got to make some decisions based on its surroundings about, like, well, I'm going to avoid this accident, but is that going to in turn cause another accident? And how do you ultimately decide between accidents, right?
But here's the other thing, right? So many of these things happen in like real time, right? So it's like, do you want your car infotainment system or its voice to be like, Darren, upcoming decision, kill the cyclist or yourself?
Yeah, well, which we have to assume you wouldn't have time, right, for that input trade-off.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So then it becomes more of like a driving log, like, Darren's AI car just made a decision, and here's why. But I mean, it's almost not even why. It's like, here was the fork in the road. It went that way.
Right. Yeah. So it's like when the laws are causing, or you're saying that the laws need to, like, would I have a choice if I'm buying two different automated cars, the one that's going to save me no matter what, or the one that's going to, make sure I don't kill anybody no matter what? Or is it just more along the lines of like, yeah, we're requiring that we can sort of do a post-mortem determination of what happened? Kind of a black box situation. I wonder where they're going at that.
From my perspective and knowledge, it seems more like a post-mortem, just given how fast things transpire. I don't see how it can even. Yeah.
Well, but I'm saying you could have sort of a predisposition on like the AI quote unquote personality. This is an aggressive driver. This is a safe driver. You know what I mean? Like, and you're gonna always do certain things, but you could have something that kind of, you could almost choose your style of driver, right? Be super safe no matter what, or like save children before you save adults, or whatever, right? As kind of a choice that would match your take on life. And theoretically, they would all be better drivers than humans anyway. So whichever choice you make is still legit, because I don't know. It's complicated. And this is yet another one of those areas where we're moving into the technology and implementing the technology much faster than we've thought through the ramifications. Or at least faster than I have. I don't know. Maybe these guys are in rooms having these conversations, but interesting stuff. Definitely I don't love hearing that people who are the experts in the thing, the possibly life destroying thing, don't actually know how the thing works. But there you have it. So anyway, let us know what you think. If you were listening, what kind of personality would you want in your automated AI? Maybe it's a driver, maybe it's your home monitor system. And does it bother you that the folks who are making it don't necessarily know how and why it's making its decisions? Let us know.
You're listening to the Diginauts on the Good Talk Podcast Network.
Time for segment 2. We're going to do an installment of Let's Hash It Out. And our hashtag this week is hashtag NASA. They have been seeing some interesting stuff. A paper was published about some stuff they've been seeing for the last couple of years out of Saturn's moon, Enceladus. Yeah. So Saturn, do you know how many moons Saturn has?
7.
I feel like when I was, a fifth grader learning about the planets, that's right about where we were. That Saturn has 77 moons. 62.
What?
Is where they are. Yeah. 62 moons, because the more we find out, we're like, oh yeah, that rock over there, that meets the technical definition or whatever.
That's insane.
Yeah. So we are finding out more and more stuff about, just to kind of give the background for this story, we're finding out more and more planets, not necessarily planets, bodies in our solar system that have water. And I have to say not necessarily planets, because yes, we've found some water on Mars, in the polar ice caps. There's evidence that Venus had water. It sure as heck looks like Pluto has water now that we have the cool pictures. And then
what about Uranus?
Yes. Nicely done in context. I got to tell a side story. For a brief period of time, I was a teacher.
Right, I remember you said that.
Yes, and I had a third grade class, and I forget why. I think because I was teaching computers. It was weird. I was a drama and a computer teacher, but I had a drama class, and I was supposed to do. Oh, here's what it was. I was doing websites, so the kids were building websites, and I was backing up what the science teacher was teaching them, and he was doing a lesson on planets. So I was going through, and I was desperately not going to pronounce it Uranus, so that I did not have to deal with the very puerile joke that you're making right now. So I'm like, yeah, and then this is the other planet, Uranus. Which is, the other legit pronunciation, right? Okay, I kid you not. This third grade kid, 8-year-old, raises his hand and says, "Ha, it's funny because you said urine." So I traded one puerile joke for the other. Yay! Anyway, I digress. It's fair to say. So the deal is they've been finding more and more bodies in the solar system that have water on them. Including a lot of the moons around Jupiter and Saturn. Eric will be laughing about urine and Uranus for the next 6 minutes.
Okay.
Do you mind if we do some science here? So Enceladus is interesting as the Saturn's moon because it shoots like big geysers out into space. And then there's several of Jupiter's moons that they have water as well. And the idea is that they may have entire underground oceans on some of these planets, Ganymede and whatnot. And they think there's a few things that could be going on there. One is the oceans themselves would be miles deep under ice or other substance. And then the gravity of Jupiter could be causing tides, pulling the liquid, kind of sloshing it back and forth, and that's enough to keep it warm. And then the other side of it is that the like pressure, like having that many miles deep, you're under enough pressure that if you think the combined gas law, you've got PV equals nRT, right? So if P goes up quite a bit, so does T. And so this may be such a thing that, there's some liquid water underneath lots and lots and lots of dense solids. And so we have moons around Saturn and Jupiter that have more water on them, they're pretty sure, than Earth does. So obviously this is intriguing if you're a scientist who's sort of following the where's the life pursuit. And
Right.
The cool thing that got released this time was about Enceladus, that, like I said, they've got these fissures on the surface of it that allow for shooting water up into the air. So there must be some kind of geothermal stuff going on there. And what they released this week is information that they had already known that there's actually a little bit more methane than would be expected. And they also found hydrogen. So both of those are indicators that maybe we have the kind of chemical energy that would be necessary for life. And you have to look at this and,
like life in the form of microbes, right?
it would totally be microbes. Well, who knows? Who knows? I mean, you're talking about an environment that barely would exist anywhere on Earth, right? Like underneath 6 miles of ice, you then have zero light ice, right, happening underneath that. So if you imagine that life did develop, you and I have brought this point up before that, well, they're searching for life as we know it. And I say search for life as we don't know it, right?
That's a good point.
But that said, there's only so much you can do, right? Do you start tracking down every silicon heavy body in the universe because theoretically silicon based life could exist? Or do you start with sort of like, let's look at the extreme conditions on Earth. Let's figure out where in the solar system and in close by systems those similar patterns exist and go from there. And that's what they're thinking here, is that this could represent something similar to methanogenesis on Earth, the biological process where methane is a result, and hydrogen. Basically, they're using free-floating hydrogen and carbon dioxide dissolved in the water. They're kicking out methane. That's what the sort of like microbes on Earth do. Those microbes that exist near some geothermal thing where the sun isn't part of what life means to them, which is similar to, what the fact that they're finding methane and hydrogen in these gas plumes through, I think they flew Cassini through it once, just to kind of detect everything. So it's interesting that, like, I kind of look at this as like, yeah, okay, or there's methane there, right? Like, it could mean that there's just a bubble of methane trapped somewhere in the, and it's, or the one place that you happen to send a satellite through happened to have a lot of methane, who knows, right? But it is interesting from the point of view is this is definitely the closest we've ever gotten to evidence anywhere off this planet of, the building blocks that you need. If you look at the actual NASA thing, they kind of said, well, there's 6 building blocks you gotta have for life. Those being, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen, the basics, and then sulfur and phosphorus. They count as the next ones. And they don't have any evidence that there's any sulfur or phosphorus there. But the fact that they're seeing some of the others, like I say, is like, we're closer than we were anywhere else.
Be neat to drill through that ice layer and just sample some of the water.
It seems like it would be the most immediate like space exploration thing to do, right? I mean, okay, it's gajillions of miles away to get to Saturn's moon, but if I'm Elon Musk and I'm picking projects, right? I don't know why he's more likely in my head than NASA to go do it, but if you're deciding where to go, at least you know there's water there, right? Like if it's buried under 6 miles of water, at least you can find some water and have something to drink, as opposed to needing to bring all of your water as payload, right? Like you could bring a water purifier as payload, or in theory.
Here's what's interesting. It says that I guess the water is salt water.
On which planet? Because there's different ones where they have
Enceladus?
Enceladus, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it would be because every planet, right, has its own geological stuff happening, right? So if it's water, it's going to have interaction with other geology, and in theory, that's going to cause things like salts to dissolve. It's not necessarily, maybe it is, I don't know. It's not necessarily the exact salt composition that, well, it wouldn't be the exact salt composition, but there's different kinds of salts, right? It's not just sodium chloride in our oceans. There's other salts that dissolve that get carried by our rivers, et cetera, et cetera. But it does imply that there's motion going on, right? And that kind of supports the theories that, okay, some forces, whether it's geothermal or whether it's gravity from planets, is causing things to kind of slosh around. I don't know. You look at all this, and to me, it's like the kind of evidence that they use to draw these conclusions is so far. Like, basically, they track that the rotation of a body has a little bit of wiggle to it, and that's one of the indicators that there may be something liquid going on the planet. Essentially, the planet is sloshing, and that slosh causes a little bit of unnatural spin around the axis that you don't see in other bodies. All of which is got to be completely theoretical, right? Because what are what's their basis for comparison? Just math. So good on them for doing it. Anyway, there's nothing really to say about this or conclude about this, but it's definitely an interesting thing that happened this week. And of course, something we'll be paying attention to, because how often do you get closer to finding life off this planet than you ever have before, right? So keep going, NASA!
Go Elon.
And Elon.
Hey, you listening? Yeah, I know you are. You're listening to our podcast, and we appreciate it. But we'd appreciate it more if you go to iTunes, especially the store, go in, log in, leave us a review, preferably 5 stars, and write nice things, and we'll get this podcast where it really needs to be in terms of more listeners. Thanks.
Welcome to the Future File segment. Many people are trying to find the fountain of youth, right? From billionaires to non-billionaires and whatnot.
Those are pretty much the two classifications of citizens of the United States under this current government. So it's good you said that. There's the billionaire class, and then there's the rest of you who are also, I guess, allowed to do things.
Exactly. Some will live, some will die. No. But in reality, whoever figures this out first will be a billionaire, let's face it. Mm-hmm. Now, if you think about cells and DNA, after a certain point, cells start to deteriorate. Some of those cells will just effectively go away. But some of those older cells, right, instead of going completely away, they'll lurk around your body, and typically around key organs ranging from the heart to the kidney to the brain and whatnot. And when they're doing that, it ultimately or they ultimately become advocates for disease. Now, what were you going to say?
Well, just interested in what you're saying. So, because I had always understood that the prevailing theory of aging was sort of the copy of a copy of a copy in your RNA. And so that but you're saying sometimes it's like, because they say you're a new human being in every 7 years or something like that, right? With the cells refreshing themselves. So these cells that have been around longer are more susceptible than other cells. Is that what we're finding?
They basically wind up promoting disease, and they're calling them senescent type cells, which ultimately cause us to age. Now, the research is basically aiming to get rid of these types of cells.
Amen.
Without trying to harm the, healthy cells.
Right.
So there's a bunch of organizations collaborating. So Erasmus University in the Netherlands, along with the Buck Institute for the Research on Aging in California, and they think they might have a solution. So they recently published in a journal called none other than Cell.
Yes, the journal Cell.
How appropriate.
I know it well.
Where they're calling it basically the equivalent of a chemical torpedo that they started experimenting with on mice, in that it looks for those senescent cells and ultimately annihilates them while leaving all of the healthy cells alone.
Huh. I would sign up for that right now.
Right.
The science is sound.
No, I agree. Sign me up. The key to this, and I think what's most promising about it, is that according to them and their studies thus far, it's not harming the healthy cells.
Okay.
Where I guess prior efforts and research, there was always the side effects and kind of the spillover into harming healthy cells, which ultimately can't be good in the first place. It's the antithesis of what they're trying to achieve.
So are we talking, is the conclusion these lab rats are younger now that they've had this treatment, or is it these lab rats are more disease resistant? Or are those two things the same thing?
So they compared the mice after 4 weeks of these injections, and the two mice, I believe one had the injections, another didn't, and there were some distinct differences between the two. One of them, I believe, had lost a lot of hair.
Okay.
And the other one, I think, also did, but the one with the injections was basically regaining that hair in a very short period of time. I think about 10 days compared to the other one. So, the mouse that had the injections, right, looks like it has like a full coat, so to speak, of hair, whereas the other one literally looks like a balding mouse.
Wow. And
Yeah.
Do mice lose their hair as they age?
You know what?
Wasn't aware of that.
I've never had a pet mouse.
Why not?
I do respect the rodent. I did have hamsters.
Nice.
But I don't recall them losing hair with age. But
You know what I'm afraid of here? You and I are solidly Gen Xers, right?
Yep.
Or at least on the late end of millennials or early end of the Gen X. The border always shifts to make me more and more into Gen X. But anyway, the point is, like, I feel like we're going to be either the last generation to die, right? Because they're going to cure science. They're going to, cure aging. And the fucking millennials will be the ones who get to stick around forever. Or even worse, they're going to get the science worked out in time for our generation, but we're going to be 90 and they're just going to trap us there. So we won't die, but we'll be 90. Like, they won't be able to reverse anything. They'll just kind of put us in old age forever.
You may get a full head of hair, Like hairy mice.
Hooray.
Happy life.
My hair started going when I was 18. I don't remember hair. So big deal. It's my achy knees that I want to have reverse.
So you can invest all that money saved on haircuts.
I do. I literally do.
That's what I'm saying. You can put it towards,
I've bought like 2 pairs of clippers in the last 15 years. Oh, and start my own aging lab. I like it.
Exactly.
In order to tell them to hurry the hell up. Nice. Well, this is, yet another story we'll be tracking. I wish them all the Godspeed, right? It's always one of those things where it's like, okay, you did it to mice. Like, that's wonderful. That's an amazing scientific breakthrough. That means that you've got 30 years to go before it has any impact on my life, Mm-hmm. Although there was a story out this week, we didn't put it in the lineup, but there's a story out about a chip that's going to replace animal testing. That they think they've found kind of an electronic way to test some different things that we test on animals now. So here's hoping that also speeds things up.
So wait a minute, you're saying it's like a simulation via a chip?
Yes. That it's
wow.
That's the theory, is that they think that they can. I don't think it replaces animal testing. Like at the end of the day, if like companies still test makeup and hairspray or whatever, right?
Mm.
Different chemicals. You're always going to need a human analog beforehand. But I think the idea is that they can get a lot of the at least initial testing out of the way mechanically now through this new breakthrough. I don't know that much about the story, but caught my eye. So
yeah,
here's hoping, and here's hoping that it keeps me from being a 90-year-old forever.
You're listening to the Diginauts on the Good Talk Podcast Network.
Okay, that means it's time for segment 4. Let's dig some more. We'll start, as we are wont to do, with Darren's official omnibus offering of Mother Earth Dispatches, a handy acronym that just happens to spell out doomed. For your latest...
How long did you spend crafting that?
No time at all. I decided what I wanted to name it. I wanted to name it Darren's Omnibus Offering. And, it just happened. It was weird that it came out that way. So, so this is the part where we go back and we revisit stories that we've talked about before. And we always dedicate the first part of that to climate science, because every damn week there's a set of headlines that I don't know, maybe it's something about my like Google News feed or something that it just, this guy loves to torture himself with how all the ways we're going to kill each other. But I don't think so. I think there's just actually that many stories out there about how fucked we are as a planet. And I try to laugh about it. But here's a few headlines to make you happy for this week. And I mean, we're just talking 1 week's headlines. Futurism.com is running 2017 is set to be the hottest year in recorded history. That shouldn't surprise anybody, since 2016 was the hottest year in recorded history, as was 2015 before it.
Shocker.
Right? So such would the trend predict. Then we've got... a story that was in Australian ABC. They said NASA images show new crack in Greenland's Petermann Glacier. This is the largest glacier in the northern hemisphere, and it's got a new crack that's heading towards another crack. They don't know whether this will cause the first crack to not have to crack as hard, basically, or whether the two cracks are going to meet each other in which case a giant glacier would be lost into the ocean. And it's like 160 square kilometers or something like that.
Wow.
Not like, it's not a continent size, but that's, I looked it up.
Sizable.
It's sizable. It's about 5% the area of Rhode Island, right? So, I mean, that's a big glacier to just suddenly, or, iceberg at that point, right?
We should colonize it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. We can call it Diginauts. Like, we'll put a little flag on it with our logo, and we can proclaim it our own island nation. I will say, though, that if we feel fucked by climate change now, when we're on a floating iceberg glacier nation, our odds will be slightly worse.
Solar power.
Well, yes. But immediately connect that solar power up to a bunch of refrigeration units so that we can increase the size of our country.
Free ices.
If anybody needs me, I'll be drafting a constitution. So it gets a little more serious, as if that wasn't it's not that those stories aren't serious. It's just like they've almost become mundane because it's like,
right,
oh yeah, another.
It's just ludicrous.
Yeah. So now a new study, a new computer model that was as complex a computer model as we've ever thrown at the concept of carbon emissions and global warming, says that the headline out of the Independent, the world must hit zero carbon emissions well before 2040, scientists warn. So this was published a few different places, or the follow-up articles came a few different places. The initial study was published in the journal Nature, and essentially they've taken the data from the new modeling and they've said, you look at the Paris Accords, which are targeting to a 2040 timeline to reduce emissions in such a way that we keep from hitting a 1.5 degree C change before the end of this century. And the model is basically saying, that's not going to happen. In fact, we've got more like 10 years. And one scientist interpreted it as like, we got 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are the odds that India, China, and the U.S. get their shit together?
Zero.
In the next 4 years. 4 years, by the way, which is the Trump administration, which is, did you see that Exxon put in for special compensation?
Of course.
Right, to get around the sanctions on Russia for
Shocker.
drilling? So there's nobody in the powers that be that are, attempting to work on this. Now, the interesting thing is scientists are then kind of saying, okay, well, so what can we do? And they've drawn up some models. The approach, and this is kind of what I've been saying all along, is that we're going to have to, we're going to have to temper everything, but we're also going to have to cause negative emissions, right? So we're going to have to find carbon sinks of some kind so that if we want to hit net zero, right? It's not nobody drives, it's people drive, but we also suck enough carbon into the ground via whatever technique that we're either net zero or ideally a little bit, pulling in a little bit more. So, but the political will needs to exist for that to happen. And unfortunately, I feel like we're gonna go past the pendulum before it gets better. So when I'm a 90-year-old sitting in an old folks' home with my perpetual 100-year life trapped in my horrible body, thanks to the fucking millennials, at least it'll be 900 degrees out during that whole time. So there's my optimism about the future for you. Next up, the last story. I thought this was the most dramatic, so I saved it for last in Doomed today. A Yukon River in the Canadian Yukon reversed course. What do you mean? Yeah. So this happens in the geological record. Like, they've found evidence here and there where rivers are either going the different way of where they've gone previously, or a river that existed based on geological conditions, hundreds of millions of years ago, flowed the opposite direction of the river that exists today. At the end of the day, it comes down to gravity, right? For a river, right? River's always going to go, basically from high source of water down to whatever the easiest path is.
Right.
Well, what has never happened in human record is us seeing it happen, and it happened over the course of a few months. Basically, what? Yeah, good stuff. I told you I saved this one for the end because it's a biggie. Over the course of a few months, we had a particularly active melting spell this year. A glacier melted. The runoff from the glacier was so massive that it carved a path, like an erosive path, through the glacier, and on the way down hit a river, and was powerful enough that it changed the course of that river. So the melt was enough that, like, when the river met the melt, it was like, oh, okay, I'll go the way of the melt now, right? So it created a new path to the sea, so that river that was going to the sea no longer is. So, wow. Yeah, so that's exciting. That's your omnibus offering of Mother Earth dispatches for this week. Pretty cheery stuff. All right. So, not all of our Let's Dig Some More segments are about the environment, just the happiest ones. Although, there's plenty of doom and gloom to be had in the other stories that we're going to cover, I gotta say. We'll end on an optimistic note, but not before we find out other ways we could die. Eric, you have the next Dig Some More segment. What do we got?
Yeah, so we've talked about autonomous vehicles, notably cars, and everyone talks about Google, everyone talks about Uber and their acquisition of Auto, everyone talks about Tesla, but in reality, a surprising company that you probably wouldn't even have guessed has been doing this for quite some time and continues to do so at a scale that, from what I've read, is larger than any of the autonomous vehicle efforts. So the company is John Deere.
Right.
If you think of John Deere, right, they have tractors, crop harvesting, you name it, everything agricultural.
Now, I thought it was funny that this headline came up this week because we just last week talked about John Deere in the like software story, right?
That's right.
Where they were basically saying that farmers were stealing their software, that they wanted to be able to control what you could and couldn't do with, your combine, your tractor, whatever the case may be.
Exactly. So here's what's different than like the autonomous cars, ranging from Tesla's efforts to Uber's efforts to Otto, among others. John Deere has relied always on satellite-driven autonomous travel,
okay.
Meaning like, there are no roads in your field for the most part, right? Like if you have a field of corn, there's really no road for the tractor to follow, right? It's just a whole field of corn. But in reality, using satellites, you know the coordinates of your field and your crop on that field, and as a result, you can literally have it plot out based on those coordinates. Go here, there, etc. Kind of like a Roomba, but probably a hell of a lot less.
A little more efficient.
Exactly. A little more efficient and less random. Right. So you're getting the best yield possible. So, candidly, it's far less complex than, what the human transport autonomous vehicles have to accomplish. But nonetheless, the scale of their operations and I'll call it the tenure of their operations far exceeds what these other companies have done thus far. So it's interesting and almost makes you wonder Why no one's thinking of acquiring maybe John Deere? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think anyone has thought of John Deere in this light before.
I'm going to go look at them as a potential investment now that you say this.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. I could see it. And I mean, it is kind of a different thing, right? Like you're not really checking some of the issues we were talking about earlier in the show, whether, are you going to hit this guy in the traffic accident or not, right? It's all corn that you're driving through.
Right.
But I would assume that if you're going to set up a tractor to run by itself, or, a thresher to run by itself, you got to have some sort of like, don't run over the, whatever, the cow software going on in there too. I hope.
I didn't see anything along those lines. Now, like, in reality, your cows shouldn't be chomping through your corn.
Right.
Right. You have some animal management issues.
Well, but at the end of the giant trucks that harvest a field of wheat, right? Or I don't even know what you would call them, a combine or thresher, or giant ass blade machine, right? Like the guys who drive those are like 9 rows deep, and like they're giant death machines if anybody's standing in the way. Right?
Yeah, I mean, you would hope that the sheer noise of one would make a cow that per se is loose in your wheat field to run the opposite direction. And you know what? If it doesn't, then it's burger time.
Fair enough. I guess I just look at it as they are solving different problems than the people who are building cars designed to navigate traffic.
Right.
I guess is my point.
To your point, right? Like if farmer Jim is in the field and he's on his cell phone and he doesn't hear the thrasher coming, right?
Sure.
That's a whole different story.
Right. Exactly. Well, speaking of automation and death, that segues perfectly into our next Dig Some More story. This is, I'll let the headline speak for itself. Robot being trained to shoot guns is, quote, not a Terminator, insists Russian deputy prime minister.
It's just what we're sending into Syria.
Yeah, this is an amazing story because the entire, the headline is, hey, this gun-toting robot is not a Terminator. It includes a video that shows like a bunch of automated tanks running through bomb fields, like blowing stuff up, and then drones that kind of come in. And I'll put a link. This is a particular article in the Independent. They include a video out of UK, and the last minute, if you scoot to the minute mark, there's a double explosion, and then the next shot is 2 mechanical robot arms carrying 2 laser-guided pistols. And these could not be more analogous to a human being. Like, they just look like robot hands, complete with thumbs and 4 fingers. Each holding giant pistols that look like they'd be too heavy for a person to carry. And, like, complete human analogs, right? Like, with a head with a visor, and they're doing target practice and knocking every target, dung, 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 dung. And the footage just shows kind of like the robot foot with the shell casing dropping to the ground next to it. So, don't worry, they're not building a Terminator. By the way, here's a video of the Terminator we built. Is really what it comes down to. So that's fun. We've talked about weaponized drones, and when questioned on it, they basically were like, no, we're just building an AI, and we thought, while we're building an AI, why don't we give it some guns?
Unreal
is pretty much what they say. So that's happening. That's being set out into the world. And it could not. Okay, if they're not building Terminators, they're at least building that machine from RoboCop that has the 2 spinning machine guns. Like, if anything, it looks. This sucker looks a lot like RoboCop with the kind of one-eyed visor across the front, and it's got a human-looking neck and human-looking chest and human-looking arms and two human-looking fists. Each
It's interesting
of which has
how
a big...
human they make it look. You know, it's like, why bother?
You really didn't need to, unless you wanted to make a Terminator, which you're busily telling us you didn't do. The exact quote here is, "We are not creating a Terminator, but artificial intelligence that will be of great practical significance in various fields."
Aw, thanks, Pewdie.
Yeah. So...
PewDiePie.
So that's happening. And I promised we'd end on an optimistic note instead of ways you could die. And that is that there's been breakthroughs out of, I believe it was Northwestern. I'm going to look that up and say it when I get there. But in new methods for 3D printing out of extraterrestrial materials, which is kind of cool.
So like moon dust?
That's exactly it. So the idea is, right, payload is expensive. Everything you have to take into space costs, I don't know, a gajillion dollars per ounce or whatever, because of the fuel that it takes to get it up there. Right. So if we could instead take a machine that could land wherever it lands, could suck the dirt up wherever it lands, and turn that dirt into, say, a wrench, then you don't have to bring a wrench. And so that's kind of the cool breakthrough here. This was, Northwestern's Simpson Quarry Institute. They published in the Nature Scientific Reports that they've made this breakthrough. People have been working on it before, but they essentially they didn't have, this much moon dust to be able to do stuff with, but they used two substances. One they called a lunar dust approximate, and the other one they called a Mars dust approximate. And they took these two substances and ran them through their technology in order to be able to kind of see what they could make. And they were able to 3D print by kind of using that material as the by far main ingredient.
Wow.
They come up with something that's flexible and elastic and tough, and they kind of compared it to rubber. They said that you could cut it, roll it, fold it, and they even then built basically Legos so that you could create interlocking parts to be able to kind of assemble. I mean, I never really thought of it, but if you're going to Mars and you have to withstand the whatever minus 80 degree temperature on the surface of Mars, Lego castle might be as easy a way to build a shelter as any if you're somewhere with nothing but dust, right?
I think, building is so expensive, and so I think it's overly complex.
Mm-hmm. Legos boil it down,
like
right?
Legos.
Yeah.
What?
Legos boil it down. Here's your interlocking pieces. So, and they're building on advancements in sort of like the honeycombing technique to be able to use less material to create something that's nonetheless really strong and blah, blah, blah. But, if we're talking about space exploration, not bad. I was just making the argument that, charge off to one of the ice planets where you've got a, plentiful source of water, but it also makes sense that a place with lots of dust that you could turn around and 3D print yourself a house.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So that's our show for today. We'd love to hear what you have to say about any of the things that we had to say. Hit us up on Twitter. I am @DigitalDarren.
And I'm @eFader.
And you can talk to us at Good Talk Network as well. We would love to hear from you by phone. Feel free to go to our website and leave us a message there. Let us know. We would love to pick up the conversation with you. We'll be back next week with more stories of science and wonderment to make you, chuckle and giggle about how you pronounce Uranus or Uranus. Your choice. So we'll be back and we'll talk to you then again next week. Good talk.